Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Detective Inspector Jolson. This is Inspector Rimmer. Hopefully, with your cooperation, we'll have all of this sorted out in no time at all. Right then, who was it who found the body?
I did. He was lying on the corridor.
And at what time was this?
It was 20 to 7. I'd just come out of the hall after winding up the clocks, and he was just lying there on the floor.
Was there anyone with you?
Yes, Sarah, Mr. Bodie's niece. She came along a few seconds later.
Right. What we will do now is each one of you in turn will be questioned. You can either do it here sensibly at the house or come down to the station where you'll all have to spend some time in a cell. What I want each one of you to do now is leave this room and find a room of your own somewhere in the house where you will be questioned. No one, and I repeat, no one should leave this house. There are 2 uniformed officers at the front door, and anyone leaving this house will be arrested immediately. Is that clear? Right, Rimmer, will you please show everyone around the house to the rooms, please?
I will, yes, sir.
Mrs. Sheridan, I'd like you to stay, please. I'd like you to be questioned first. Thank you. Now then, Mrs. Sheridan, please tell me what happened.
Well, Mr. Bodie, the deceased, was about to put our money into an investment that George Cranley had told me about. I think they were working on it together. I'd given him all my life savings to George to pass on to Mr. Bodie, as I thought I'd get a rather nice little profit once things had got going. Something that Mr. Cranley told me earlier made me change my mind. He said that Boulder's brewery was on the slide, and if the money was invested, then I'd lose it. Funnily enough, a few minutes later, Harry Kane, a friend of my late husband, came into the kitchen and literally told me the same story. I gave him a screwdriver and told him where the files on the brewery were. I wanted to get my money back, and I knew where Mr. Brody kept the key for the safe. I got the key from under a video case and went to the dining room where the safe was hidden. As I was on my way to put the key back, I heard the click of a telephone receiver being replaced, and then Mrs. Smythe came out of the lounge. She'd been listening in to a telephone call.
Anything else you can remember?
Oh yes! Someone had tied a rope across the top of the stairs, which I very nearly fell over. Find out who did that and you may find your murderer.
I'm ashamed to admit it, but I encouraged people to invest in Boulder's brewery. I knew the place was going down, but Bodie was blackmailing me. He knew that I'd been convicted of embezzlement a few years ago and was threatening to shout about it if I didn't help him. He was going to get commission on everybody else's money. I didn't want to fall out with these people, so I knew it was stupid, but I got some rope out of Mrs. Sheridan's cupboard and tied it to the top of the stairs. I then took the bulb out of the stairs light. Mr. Bodie was always the first one down for dinner, but not this time. Unfortunately, Mrs. Sheridan got there first. It could have killed her. Well, that finished it for me. I decided to sit and wait and see what happened next. I don't know why, but Michael Smythe was marching purposefully down the corridor carrying a massive knife. Why he did that, I've no idea. Furthermore, Mrs. Smythe fired a gun at me for no apparent reason. She said the next shot would be for Mr. Bodie. I was with Harry Kane when I found about Miss Bodie's sudden, unfortunate demise.
Enter.
Excuse me, sir, I've found these items dotted around the house, and the forensic guys have arrived.
Excellent. They can set up base in the next room. Give them those items and then come back in here.
Yes, sir.
Oh, and Rimmer, send in Mr. Smythe, will you?
Right away, yes, sir.
Ashley Bodie was blackmailing me. I'd been in business with Ashley a few years ago. He used to work from home, and I used to come round 3 times a week to oversee his finances. I used to see his niece Sarah quite a lot, and when Ashley caught us in a rather uncompromising position, that was it for me. He asked me to invest in these shares for this brewery, and when I refused, he threatened to tell Evelyn. Also, some idiot had tied a rope to the top of the stairs, and poor Mrs. Sheridan very nearly copped it. I helped her to the kitchen, and she gave me a knife. I went off to cut the damn rope down. Later on, Sarah told me she'd found a telegram addressed to me, but she didn't have time to finish telling me because Evelyn appeared. We sat there in silence for a moment or two, then I left the room, as the atmosphere was awful. I was in the bathroom when I heard about Ashley.
Enter.
Gov, forensics have got all the stuff now. They'll do a report on it and have it to you as soon as possible.
Thank you, Rimmer. Please escort Mr. Smythe back to his room and send in Mrs. Smythe.
Right, you are, sir. Mr. Smythe, come along, sir, please.
One way and another, Mr. Bawdy had power over all of us. Firstly, Michael told me that the deal was going through, and I stood to lose everything. Boulder's Brewery was rapidly going downhill. These fears were substantiated when I heard the telephone ring, and when it stopped, I picked it up and listened into the telephone call. Someone called Robert was telling Mr. Bawdy that he got all the money, and it only needed Mr. Bawdy's signature for the deal to go ahead. Mr. Bawdy also told this Robert chap that if the deal went ahead, he would own all of us. That frightened me, and I'll admit that I didn't think about doing away with him there and then. Unfortunately, George Cranley nearly came a cropper when I pointed a gun at him and I fired it. I didn't mean any harm to come to him. I was just so infuriated and confused. When I left George carrying on the floor, I headed for the dining room. When I went in there, Sarah Bawdy, Ashley's niece, very quickly hid some papers behind a row of videos. I don't know what they were. She stayed in the room though to make sure that I didn't go looking for them. We were still in there together, not saying very much, when we heard the unfortunate news.
I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Boulders could fall at any time, and I dipped into my godson's trust fund and invested a sizable fortune. I knew this was illegal, and if the deal failed, I could go to jail, but I was promised a large profit. Something had to be done to stop Bawdy, and when I saw Cranley going up the stairs with a large rope, I left him to it. I think that Mrs. Sheridan has fallen out with me. I asked her to go through Bawdy's files, but her loyalty prevented her from doing so. But she reluctantly handed me a large screwdriver to do it myself. I went into his office and broke into his drawer, but when I finally opened it, I discovered it was empty. I left the screwdriver in the office while we had dinner. I happened to be passing the office just afterwards and saw the screwdriver still on the office table. I picked it up, took it back to the kitchen. Cranley was there, and that's when we found out about the murder.
Thank you, Mr. Kane.